What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 14 top 35 wide receiver rankings, likely the final week before the fantasy playoffs. So hopefully you guys can pick up a win here in Week 14. Hopefully this video helps you guys do that. If you enjoyed the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. But let's dive right into Tier 1. These are the locks in your lineup. We've got JSN, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, Puka Nacua, and Rashee Rice. I feel like these guys have kind of separated themselves as the top option. I will make a point for JSN. Very uncharacteristic. Week 13, 2 receptions for 23 yards. I'm really not panicking. Like, it was a terrible game script, in terms of just like the Seahawks blowing out the Vikings. And in JSN's previous 7 games, he had gone for at least 20 fantasy points in all of them. So he's still a stud. He's a high-end wide receiver 1, not panicking on JSN. Now looking at tier 2, I'm going to start it off with Nico Collins going up against the Chiefs. Nico's been super productive as of late, 21 plus points in 3 of his last 4 games. He's seen at least 10 targets in 5 of his last 6. Wide receiver 8, I've got Devontae Adams going up against the Cardinals. His overall reception, receiving yardage numbers aren't amazing. The dude just is getting into the end zone at an insane rate. In his last 6 games, he has scored 11 total touchdowns. It's really crazy, but he just keeps scoring week after week. I'm fully expecting it to continue. And against the Cardinals, the Rams are tied for the highest implied point total. So a lot of opportunities in that matchup. Then I've got Drake London going up against the Seahawks. There's no guarantee he plays this week. He's day-to-day with that knee injury. Falcons not really in the playoff picture. Personally, I wouldn't try to rush him back. But if he is healthy, still going to be, a lock in your lineup as a wide receiver 1. Up next is A.J. Brown, and after a really rough start to the season, I want to say he's climbed his way back up to the wide receiver 12 area in points per game. Back-to-back monster performances. Week 12, 8 for 110 and a touchdown. Week 13 against the Bears, 10 for 132 and 2 touchdowns. The Eagles' offense doesn't look good. They're losing games, but A.J. Brown's putting up numbers for fantasy. That is all we care about. He is back to being a top 10 wide receiver for me this week. After Brown, I've got Chris Olave going up against the Buccaneers with Tyler Shuck. He's averaging 17.4 points per game. This offense doesn't look great, but there's just very few, competent weapons. Chris Olave is the clear number 1 target. Wide receiver 12, I've got Jamison Williams going up against the Cowboys. And admittedly, I am scared having JMO ranked this high because he is just such a, boom or bust option at the wide receiver position. This is obviously assuming that Amon-Ra St. Brown is not playing this week. If Amon-Ra was playing, if he was healthy with that ankle, he would be in tier 1. But for JMO, he's coming off a monster week 13, got a lot of opportunities with Amon-Ra St. Brown leaving early, 7 receptions for 144 yards and a touchdown. And then matchup-wise, this is just a great spot against the Cowboys. They're allowing the most points per game to the wide receiver position. Outside of my top 12 wide receivers, but still in tier 2, I've got T. Higgins. No guarantee he clears concussion protocol this week, but if he does play, this is just typically where he's going to slot in. And then my last guy in this tier, Jalen Waddle, going up against the Jets. He had a really strong, 4 or 5 games after the Tyreek Hill injury. Last 2 games have been underwhelming, under 9 PPR points in both of them. But I like this matchup here against the Jets. Still a believer in the talent of Jalen Waddle, so he's going to be the last guy in this tier. Now kicking off a smaller tier 3, I've got Ladd McConkey going up against the Eagles. I am expecting Justin Herbert to play this week. He had surgery on the left hand. From what I've seen from all the fantasy doctors out there, he should be day-to-day, and it shouldn't be a huge hindrance to him in week 14. So assuming Herbert's in there, this is where I'd have Ladd. Slow start to the season, but since week 5, he's averaging 15.4 points per game. That's about the production that we were, expecting throughout the entire season. Also in tier 3, I have Emeka Egbuka going up against the Saints, and I could see some people, kind of fading this ranking where he has not been producing like the wide receiver 16 as of late. He's actually scored under 10 PPR points in 6 of his last 7 games. This is kind of just a spot where I believe in the player. The volume is there. He's seen at least 8 targets in his last 6. Mike Evans could potentially return this week. Probably more likely he comes back in week 15, some point in the fantasy playoffs. But there's just been a lot of things that haven't really gone Igbuka's way. Baker's missed him on some key opportunities, some big plays, some touchdowns. Igbuka also, hasn't been the most productive in terms of like consistently bringing in targets. He's had his fair share of drops, missed opportunities. So the volume's there. I think he's in a good situation, right, with Baker at quarterback. I think he's a good wide receiver. So I can only drop him so far. And then even like outside of this, right, like when you get into tier 4, tier 5, it's not like you're looking at a bunch of slam dunk options. So Ibuka kind of remains here in like the mid to high end wide receiver 2 range. And then the last guy in this tier, also someone who has been very underwhelming, Justin Jefferson going up against the Commanders. In Jefferson's last 4 games, he has put up 7.7, 11.1, 8.8, and 2.4 PPR points. I think a lot of people were wondering, like, could it get any worse than JJ McCarthy at the quarterback position? And the answer is yes, because Brosmer went in there and just completely laid an egg. An awful performance. JSN, I think that's got to be like his worst game of his career. 2.4 PPR points, like that is abysmal. It does seem like McCarthy's going to be back. I guess I'm excited for that just based on how bad it looked in week 13. But I also just think this is a really nice matchup against the Commanders. They're top 6 in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. I obviously still believe in the talent of Justin Jefferson. And so in a plus matchup, even though McCarthy sucked, I still think like mid-tier wide receiver 2 is a fine spot for him. Now moving into tier 4, we're going to start it off with Devonta Smith going up against the Chargers. Don't have a ton to say about him. This is kind of just where he's produced on the season. He's the wide receiver 20 in points per game. I guess you're hoping for some sort of trailing game script against the Chargers, although the Eagles are the favorites here. Then I've got Marvin Harrison Jr. going up against the Rams. He is dealing with a heel injury, so we'll see if he actually is able to suit up. After missing 2 games, he returned 6 for 69, solid production, while also kind of being in and out of the game with that heel injury. Michael Wilson really took a back seat, so I'm back in on Marv being like a wide receiver 2 rest of season. Wide receiver 20, I've got Zay Flowers going up against the Steelers, and Zay Flowers had been just like this ultra consistent, high floor, super low ceiling option at the wide receiver position, and that just all came tumbling down in week 13. 7 targets, 2 receptions for 6 yards, and it's like when you're giving like no upside, one kind of bad game like that can just completely tank your rank in terms of like points per game. Now, I do think this is a decent bounce back opportunity. Steelers are second in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position, but man, Lamar just looks super limited. The like athleticism, the burst is clearly not there. Like he doesn't even have the speed to like consistently get outside of the pocket, which is concerning. But Zay Flowers had been very solid up until last week. I think he's a fine like mid to back end wide receiver 2 play. Another guy who's coming off a rough week 13, rough last few weeks, Michael Pittman going up against the Jaguars. In his last 3 games, he has gone 2 for 19, 5 for 27 and a touchdown, and then 1 for 13. So like, the week 12 game, decent fantasy points, but still only 27 yards. It hasn't been great. Daniel Jones kind of banged up. I think he's still playable as like a back end wide receiver 2 option. Someone who's a riser here, Jacoby Myers going up against the Colts. There was certainly some uncertainty on what the usage was going to look like with BTJ back in the lineup. You had Parker Washington, who had kind of emerged. Obviously, you brought in Jacoby Myers with BTJ, kind of take a back seat. Jacoby Myers was the wide receiver 1 in snaps, routes, and targets. Big game, 6 receptions for 90 yards and a touchdown. This was a really solid Trevor Lawrence performance. So definitely looking good for Myers moving forward. Now pivoting into tier 5, going to start it off with Courtland Sutton going up against the Raiders. Finally logged a really strong game in week 13, 5 receptions for 62 yards and a touchdown. It's a good matchup against the Raiders. They are top 5 in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. Up next, I've got Alec Pierce, and he's a guy who I gave a lot of respect to heading into the, I think it was the week 12 matchup. Really kind of laid an egg, overall rough performance from the Colts passing attack, but he comes back in week 13, 4 for 78 and a touchdown. He has now scored at least 17 PPR points in 3 of his last 4 games, and Alec Pierce at this point is just like a legitimately good wide receiver. He's someone who doesn't need like a ton of passing volume. He's consistently putting together big plays week after week. So Alec Pierce, I think, is a very viable play in like the fringe wide receiver 2 range. Then I've got back-to-back Commanders wide receivers, Deebo Samuel and Terry McLaurin. I think you could make the case for both of these guys being higher. My biggest issue is just the matchup here. The Vikings are actually allowing the fewest points per game to the wide receiver position. Debo's had an interesting kind of arc this season where he was really impressive early on in the year. Then towards the middle of the season, the production was super lackluster. Last 3 games have been very solid out of him. And then we've got Terry McLaurin, who, despite like not playing his normal number of routes, he only had a 59% route participation in week 13. Really strong numbers. He had 14 targets on only 32 routes, 7 receptions for 96 yards and a touchdown. It's been a really frustrating season for Terry McLaurin, so it's good to see him come back off of injury and actually log a really strong game. After those Commanders guys, I've got Christian Watson going up against the Bears, and he just continues to produce. Week 13, 10 targets, 4 receptions for 80 yards and a touchdown, 12.6 PPR points per game. This Packers wide receiver room is really all over the place. You've got Christian Watson, who has really been like the steady presence in this offense since coming back from injury. You've got Romeo Doubs, who had his run, but seems like he's kind of fading. I really liked Dontavian Wicks as like a sleeper last year. He's done pretty much nothing. All of a sudden goes out on Thanksgiving and has just like a nuclear performance. You've got Matthew Golden, who's banged up. And then you've got Jaden Reed, who could be returning this week, and I think is probably their best wide receiver, but just not quite sure what his usage is going to look like heading into week 14. The final guy in tier 5 is going to be Khalil Shakir going up against the Bengals. I like the matchup. The Bills are tied for the highest implied point total. It just hasn't been great out of Shakir recently. Last 3 games, he had 1 boom game in between these, 8 for 110, but his other 2 games, 1 reception for -3 yards, and then 1 reception for 5 yards. Like, that is just not getting it done. So it's tough to rank him any higher than this with like 2 just complete clunker games in his last 3. Then moving into tier 6, kind of an interesting mix of guys, some talented players in some rough situations, guys that I don't think are super reliable. I'll start it off with Rome Odunze. Man, a few weeks into the season, looked like he was going to be fantasy wide receiver 1, having this huge year 2 breakout. It has not been pretty as of late. He has scored under 9 PPR points in his last 3 games. He has scored under 9 PPR points in 4 of his last 5, and then also 6 of his last 8. So there hasn't been any consistency. The weekly floor is very, very low. This Bears run game has been awesome. You also just have a lot of cooks in the kitchen offensively with DJ Moore, Luther Burden, Colston Loveland, Cole Kmet. DeAndre Swift can make plays out of the backfield as a pass catcher. So Rome Odunze really slipping. Right now, he is my wide receiver 29. Another guy who slipped after a hot start to the season, Quentin Johnston, going up against the Eagles. From weeks 1 through 4, Quentin Johnston had at least 70 receiving yards in all 4 games. He has not hit 70 receiving yards in a game since, so that's 7 weeks without hitting that mark. I think the O-line injuries have really hurt Quentin Johnston, someone who likes to win down the field, a higher ADOT option. With Herbert having to get rid of the ball so quickly, like a lot of those opportunities just aren't available anymore. Did get into the end zone this past week, so kind of saved his fantasy day. Then I've got Michael Wilson going up against the Rams. Obviously had those 2 monster games with Marv out, 15 for 185, 10 for 118. Marv back in the lineup, falls back down to earth, only 3 for 36. We'll see if this was kind of, a one-off down game, but we do have a pretty strong sample size. When he is playing with Marv, Michael Wilson has not been productive for fantasy football. Then I've got BTJ going up against the Colts. Came back, strong usage in terms of the routes, 84%. Route participation, 3 targets, 2 receptions for 28 yards. I like the matchup against the Colts. I'm really not scared of this secondary, especially with them likely missing Sauce Gardner. So maybe BTJ could take advantage of that. It just doesn't feel like it's fully coming together here for him. Like, monster rookie season, looked like he could have a huge year 2, just not the case so far. Then I've got DK Metcalf going up against the Ravens. He has scored under 10 PPR points in 4 of his last 5. He has not hit 60 receiving yards in his last 7 games. It's been tough sledding for DK Metcalf. Then I've got a rookie wide receiver here with Jaden Higgins going up against the Chiefs. In his last 4 games, he has been solid: 15.2, 9.5, 13.8, 11.5 PPR points. We'll see if he can keep it rolling here against the Chiefs. And then the last guy in this tier, Chris Godwin, going up against the Saints. Week 13, The usage was fine, still not, at 100% back to like full starting reps, but 66% route participation, 5 targets, 3 receptions for 78 yards, dropped a touchdown, very easy touchdown right in the hands, which could have made this a much bigger game. We'll see on the status of Mike Evans. If Evans is back, I would not have Chris Godwin ranked in my top 35, but this is kind of where I've settled. There's a few players that, could have cracked the list, thinking of like a Xavier Worthy type. Trey Franklin was in the mix, but he's bleeding opportunities to Pat Bryant, maybe one of the Bears wide receivers. But it does get pretty thin here at the wide receiver position. Also a shout out to Jaden Reed, who I mentioned earlier on. So that is going to wrap it up for my top 35. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.